It's my pleasure and honor to celebrate my friend here and to introduce Linda Gale Walker. She's been an educator for 28 years. I know it only looks like it's been 12, ranging from a teacher to an administrator to a college professor. And today she actually works with educators as an adjunct professor with the nonprofit Center for College and Career Readiness. And she also works as an instructional designer with Meteor Education. She has certifications and hands-on experiences in the areas of reading and writing and literacy and education and special education and gifted education and diagnostic testing and administrative leadership. So pretty much she is a never-ending student
Love school.
of school, right? She works with districts on increasing engagement, and that's what we're going to be talking about today at home in creating a culture of success. She's also and I think this is really interesting about your story, Linda Gale. She's worked with a nonprofit that helps abused and neglected children for the past 21 years and is a trainer in parenting for the Texas PTA. So that kind of brings us together as we're thinking about authentic learning around the house for teachers and parents. Linda Gale, what is authentic learning?
Well, it's really funny. It's like kind of one of those things I say, going back to me, I was not a huge math person, as you can tell from my resume. And I can remember thinking in Algebra 2 going, why in the world am I ever going to use this example? Well, authentic learning is really like where you take the learning you know and use it. So one of the things that I really, kind of got into is home improvement and how do things work. And geometry was like, I was like, aha. So that's really what authentic learning is. It's using the things that you've learned to really authentically use them around the house. It's not, it's great with parents being home. One of the things I think is very difficult working with abused and neglected kids is not all kids have a safe home to go to. So, and a lot of parents are really stressed. And one of the things I want to say today with authentic learning is the opportunities for that everywhere. So an authentic learning opportunity to use those things could be as simple as building communication skills to video chat your grandkids or your grandmother. Those kind of pieces all go together to help create authentic learning. I'll give you a little bit more examples later on, but one of the big feedback I think that I got from a lot of people is why does this matter? A lot of people are struggling as teachers. Not everybody has technological needs or that they have to do online learning. So some kids have packets, some kids have the technology aspect. And it's hard. So one of the things we talk about this is the reason teachers could use this is it helps kids kind of have a more level playing field with authentic learning. And it also helps them build future ready skills with collaboration. I mean, as bad as this is, and it is terrible on everybody, but especially our teachers who struggle with trying to be sure that the needs are met of their students, you're building a lot of great virtual collaboration skills in kids that maybe you didn't have time to do that during the year. Also that physical communication, problem solving, those pieces, and increasing that low stakes risk taking. Not that there's positive out of this, but there was a little sigh of relief from all my friends in education that teach when the testing was like, we're lifting this ban. So being able to use those skills more authentically is a perfect example to do that this spring, and do some things that help kids reinforce skills. And that also helps retention. I mean, when you do something, let me ask you, Kevin, have you ever cut a board or made anything?
Sure.
Okay. Have you ever heard this old saying? My grandma used to say it, measure twice, cut once. Have you ever heard that?
Right.
If
Yes, I have.
If you do that, you will do that every single time now because you learned and it's embedded in who you are and you're able to transfer that to other things. That's another benefit of authentic learning. And it also helps our parents because parents are in a tough spot too. We know our kids well, but this isn't our range of sometimes expertise. So helping our parents with authentic learning use their expertise too to help going from enabling kids to actually empowering them is a huge thing.
Do you think, Linda Gale, like I know many parents now that they're seeing their kids work maybe a little bit up close or their student is working at home, and that can be kind of intimidating. Is this a way to help build confidence with the parents? Because these are things they can do, right?
Absolutely. And that's a piece of it too as a teacher is to kind of, this is a time to explore thinking outside the box about what actually some of these things we'll look at. And Sebastian, could you put the next slide real quick? I just wanted something else that for teachers as you do that, we're building confidence in parents. And that doesn't mean 600 standards. I think it's about thinking, what do I really want kids to know? If I'm really working on building some skills like say in measurements and fractions and equations, what better way to do that than to move ahead and really have them measure and make a meal with your family. There's tons of ways you can do those things and incorporate what's going on. But for the teacher, just being able to be open to that. I always have said, as far as projects, you know, I'm a little of a control freak, Kevin. I know you probably don't believe that.
I've known you for a while.
That's hard to, that's probably a little hard for you to believe. But one of the things I really noticed is in my head, when my kids are doing a project, I know how I think it should look. I'm like, because I'm a teacher, so where's your river? Da, 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 da. What I've noticed is when I back off and let the kids do it and let them take it where their learning takes it, they learn more. Now, the product may not look as perfect as it would if I did, but the learning they get is a lot more deep and intentional. Sebastian, would you mind going back just one more slide really quick? And the other thing on, sorry, there it is. One of the things too is empowering those families. What do your families need? Where do you live? Like you said, you live in Florida. So, you know, what are the things in your area that you know is a commonality amongst your kids? Everybody has to eat. I always use the example of eating because, you know, every kid has to eat. But how can I get kids to go from, okay, maybe a kindergartner gets to pick, has to pull everybody in the house to see what they want for dessert. Maybe that moves a little bit differently for a kid in 3rd or 4th grade. Maybe they plan the meal and communicate it, put everything out, and you can teach etiquette through that. You could teach science, you could teach measurement, math. Then maybe they write, you know, a reflection of what it tasted like. All those pieces incorporate standards, but they are part of that authentic learning at home. So by thinking outside the box a little bit when we're planning for this, it's hard for teachers. And teachers, I'm going to preface this so they're listening is, you know, don't make this also harder on yourself, but kind of think about how does that all go together? Okay, how can those pieces all go together? Can they go to where I'm teaching a math lesson, I'm teaching a lesson, and maybe it is create a plan to travel somewhere this summer. Once the ban is lifted, can I incorporate math? Can I incorporate, you know, budgeting? Can I incorporate some history in that? So all those pieces work together developmentally. So maybe it looks different in kindergarten, but a lot of this authentic learning can really start at home and be really transferable and get the whole family collaborating.
Can you give us some specific examples, some of the things? I think on the next slide, Sebastian, we have a few, you know, very precise, specific ideas, right?
Yes. So we need to be sure whatever your authentic learning task has, it has real life relevance. And the challenges aren't just one answer. They need to be not easily solvable or you're kind of losing your whole intent. The other thing is the projects need to require a significant amount of time. It's not like just go ask your dad what he wants for dessert. It's more about what skills am I using for that? So if I had somebody in kindergarten deciding to start on the family, but I was really wanting them to practice communication skills, maybe even learning how to make a poll or that kind of thing, then I would do that and ask, but it would take a significant amount of time. Experiences that have multiple sources and perspectives, collaboration would be important, and reflection. Like, you know, how did we cooked this? Did we love it? We planned this trip. Do we think it's great or is it too much to do? And then the cross-curricular component is huge in this. And that's going to be a little bit of a thing to think about for my high school teachers in content. But, you know, this is another great time for our teachers to collaborate together too. And then the other question that's a big thing with everyone is, how will I know they know? Well, there's so many opportunities. There's Flipgrid, there's video chats. You could have them Google Doc, put something together. There's tons of ways to assess that. But just remember, what's that critical content? I keep going back to my question one is it quality over quantity? What do I want kids to know? And that's all really your assessment needs to answer.
That's fantastic. So, you know, I'm wondering a little bit about parents. Obviously, teachers have a lot of different tools in their toolbox, but sometimes our parents, they might not necessarily know or even feel as comfortable. How about the parents?
Okay, well, Sebastian, can you switch me one more time? Let's talk a little bit about that too. As a mom of kids that has come back in my house, it's disruptive, and also working from home with multiple people is hard. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk a little bit about is kind of that myth of perfect. If you are a person that's a little bit likes things all together, perfect is not part of what our mindset is right now. It is about really, are we safe? Are we happy? I go back to my owl picture of crisis schooling. Nobody picked this. I have a 21-year-old kid who's like, but I want to go see my girlfriend. And I'm like, you know what? We're under lockdown. It's not my choice, but this is what it is. So just getting away from that whole, I've got to set this kid in front of the computer for 4 hours in a desk in a row in a chair, because that's what it looked like when I was in school. It's completely thrown out the window. You've got to get away from that myth of perfect. Is it okay for them to do their homework, you know, in the afternoon if that's when they study best? Absolutely. Do they need to be on the, you know, if your teacher has a time for a video chat? Absolutely. But just to have them sit in front of the computer, you've got to know your kid and know your time frame. If you have multiple kids, that's an extra challenge. One of the things I would consider with that is maybe even giving kids some individual time. So maybe say, okay, you guys are going to be over here doing your thing. This is your free time when I do a schedule. And we're going to really focus on this for you, because you'll be surprised that intentional focus on that and getting that kid started. What our goal is, to me, a little bit of this authentic learning is to light their own fire. I'm excited about doing this. It's not a drudgery. So thinking about those kinds of things too is important. The next thing is kind of shifting our mindset to this is a crisis counsel. This is crisis schooling, and your kid's going to be okay. Teaching them some of the things. I don't know if y'all, I'm from the South. We shell peas. Does anybody, do you know, Kevin, about shelling peas? You get the peas off and you pull them out and everything would fine. Well, what's so funny about that is I used to shell peas with my grandmother. I think it was for me to get my mom, you know, my mom would get me out of her hair a little bit. I would sit at my grandmother's feet and learn so many things and have so many conversations and things like, well, you can sometimes not tell if a pea's rotten from the outside. You'll have to shell it, but you can usually see a little black spot, and people are like that too. If people show you who they are, no. There's tons of times for some of those little lessons that we miss out in our busy schedule. That's one of the things that I really encourage parents to do is the things like, why does this make you special? What is exciting about your family? Those are conversations that sometimes get lost in basketball after school scheduling. I've got to get homework done. We just are such fast-paced world. Being able to do that is helping too. The other thing is relationships and relevance. Kids have to see that this matters if you're a parent. So if I'm doing algebra, I can remember thinking, why do I need that? But if I'd have gone out and built something, or even geometry, if I'd have gone out and built something, I'd have been like, oh, that makes sense. I have to know that angle. So being sure to pull that relevance piece to your kids is helpful. There is nothing, I have a son with severe ADHD, and there is no bigger beating if you have a child that has severe ADHD than having them sit and do homework for 4 or 5 hours at a time. So be sure that you think about, okay, my relationship with this kid, I know we're going to work for 30 minutes. And then, you know, we're going to go ahead and do something else for a minute. So he had to have a carrot. I always say at the end of the carrot was always better for me than the stick. So that's something to think about too. Or there's some things as that relationship you can kind of leverage. And you're going to have to work as well sometimes. So thinking about that schedule for your whole family. This is no lie. I set team norms for my kids, and we set our team schedule. And on the refrigerator every day, it's like, I have a son in medical school that's here, and he's like, quiet time has to be ABC. It's worked out great, but it's been those conversations you got to communicate and being sure you have balance. Now, I always talk about letting your glitter settle, and if you're on next week, we're going to talk about mindfulness and letting your glitter settle. Sometimes you may need a mommy or a daddy timeout too, or a teacher timeout. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, this is wearing us out. Emailing the teacher even and saying, I'm not sure. Don't just keep beating your head against the wall. It's not the time for that. The most important thing is to keep us calm and healthy and safe. And then location, location, location. This has changed my mindset. And I added this, Kevin, today, because I've noticed my son, when he's doing his schoolwork, it's a struggle when we're sitting at the table and everybody's hearing things, but he can sit outside. We still can get Wi-Fi, and he's better. Or it's fine for kids to do stuff on the couch. I know I grew up thinking you have to sit at a desk. It makes you study better. I love school. I know this is how it is, but it's not anymore. So just thinking about location of those tasks. If you have a kid that needs a quiet space or spot, let them sit there.
That's great. I see that as well. But, you know, with myself in the mornings, I start off working outside, and then I come inside. And my son also kind of goes to different spaces. I really get that. What are some of the challenges? What can be difficult about this? Sebastian, what's the next slide?
Well, I think one of them is the piece of having just multiple people in your house. I think it's difficult. And I think some people really struggle with, there's a lot of worries for parents. There's a lot of worries for teachers. And I think sometimes we can let those worries really drive us crazy. And I think sometimes we're getting so much on the computer. Everybody was just trying so hard at the beginning with this change going, what do we do? How do we get that out? That I think things are going to kind of make a natural progression. But the hardest thing, or the thing to think about is get up and move. We know research says that. We know research says it's not great to sit in front of your computer sitting 8 hours a day. In fact, there's something the other day that talked about that, sitting is the new smoking. So think about that too. And also use this opportunity to grow and play and learn together. I'm 5'2". You can't see this today, so pretend I'm 6 feet if y'all are watching, but I am 5'2", and I'm no basketball player, though I do enjoy sports. So I have played 20 games around the world. I am terrible. I never win, but it's such a nice activity for my kids. Board games are another thing. Even just asking questions around the dinner table. Some of these things that we used to do before life got so crazy and hectic, we have kind of really need to go back to and think about. Another thing I think about is limiting screen time. If your kids are on the computer all day doing schoolwork, then they're on their phone texting all their friends, next time, be sure you're gearing in some downtime for them too. With authentic learning, it's about making the most. We used to call them in the old days teachable moments, but taking those teachable moments to use those skills. Now, one of the things teachers can do too to help parents with that is say, these are what I'm really focused on. This is what I really want your kid to get. And parents look at that and be a co-collaborator with your teacher more than ever before.
That's outstanding. And I think as we wrap up, this idea of active learning is really interesting. I think about it as a way to preserve my own sanity. For my kids, they just need to move. Why do you think that's such an interesting or a really critical core piece of this?
Well, I think that active learning too, kids learn differently. And it goes back to the, measure twice, cut once. When you do something physically, you're engaging all components of your body. You're doing the physical, you're doing social, you're doing emotional. All of those pieces go together to tie in that intellectual learning. So as we talk about why active learning is important, number one, it helps with kids that have any kind of attention span disturbance. The other thing about authentic learning that's different is it can be virtual, but a lot of times there's just something to be said for hands-on active learning and to really solidify what you want to know. Going back to the example of if I was teaching a class on, what to do for planning a trip, I might have to watch some stuff, but those conversations and let's specifically talk about how this works. And maybe we even draw a map out kind of ourselves and talk about the road trip. Those are things that help solidify that information in their mind. And if you go back to the learning pyramid that we showed earlier, it goes back to that whole learning by doing. Participation shows retention at a much greater, lectures 5%, readings 10, and participating by doing is 90% retention rate. That's the biggest selling piece for authentic learning.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. If you are in the audience and you'd like to send a question via chat, I am monitoring that. And I did get a question here, which was, does the parent always have to be involved? Can you have the students participating in active learning without the parent?
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to engagement, encouraging and enabling. So yes, absolutely. As long as everybody's going to need a little bit of time to themselves too. You and I both talked about that lately, that sometimes you can't just be sitting with someone 24/7. It's not good for any of you. So yes, active learning is great for your kids as long as you feel like it's safe. Like if you had a fourth grader, might not send him out with like the saw by himself if he wasn't prepared to do that. But active learning or authentic learning in that activity is fine on your own. The key is to be sure that the kids are engaged in that activity. So I was talking to you about being at a kind of a quiet spot, but from where I am, I can see all different parts of my house. So you don't have to be hovering, but being able to kind of monitor within a decent amount of proximity helps a whole lot. I have teenage boys, and so the phone is a huge issue. So that's another piece too. If they're using their phone for work, great. But there's just nothing to be said for being able to go by and see if they're actually watching The Office or doing what they're supposed to be doing. Collaborating. So those pieces kind of all change together, but no. And that goes back to the balance being key part too.
Mm-hmm. One last question, Linda Gale. So if you're a teacher, you often think about differentiated instruction, or you think about accommodation for kids who have different kinds of needs. And today there's a lot of conversation around culturally responsive education. Those can all be challenges when you're at a distance. Make a connection, if there is one, between authentic learning around the house and how I'm either differentiating or making an accommodation or being culturally responsive in that activity.
Well, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about where are you? What part of the area do you live in, and what is that culture of your area? That makes a big difference when you're doing authentic learning. It makes a big difference the backgrounds that your kids have and your parents. I heard yesterday on the guest speaker talked about sometimes parents feel very out of their element. You don't want to, exasperate that. So think about that and really be culturally responsive. One of the things I would highly suggest people think about as well is maybe finding out some things. This is a perfect time to say, what talk about your things that are important in your family and that culture and that heritage, because too often we're so separated by distance sometimes that we don't, and we just don't have time to call grandma more than on the birthday and say, hey, how's it going? But really be able to sit and have almost mimicking virtually that sitting at the feet shelling peace story makes a big difference for kids. So that helps with the cultural responsive teaching, and also being very aware of being able to use this time to help kids see things from other perspectives. It's a scary world. Kids are scared. They don't know. If you just watch one channel versus the other, it's hard to know what is going on. So being able to be that person to really help navigate those waters for kids is important. And you talked about kids with sometimes, maybe we talk about our struggling learners or even maybe your gifted learners. An important piece of this authentic learning is it can be so individualized. That's what I love about it. So maybe, and that goes back to not having a preconceived notion of this is what the product has to look like. If I'm having a student be in charge of dinner, say, and it's a kid that's, they're totally ready to do the whole thing. Mom, step out of the kitchen. Let me tell you what I need. Maybe they go in and inventory the pantry. It may look different for another kid. The other child may do that side by side with some help and some intervention. And it's a good thing for parents too, because as parents, we are preparing our kids for the day they leave the nest. Now mine came back, but we are preparing them for that day. And if we don't use some of that moving from enabling to empowering, it's not doing any of us a service. And sometimes and I'm going to say this parent, I moved to enable because it's faster for me. But right now we're kind of the, blessing of time. So.
Right. Well, Linda Gale, wow, that was a great chat and chew. Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about what's coming up next week.
Well, next week, my colleague Pam Gashler and I are going to be I'm going to be talking about finding your moments of peace and kind of letting your glitter settle. I am doing tons of research, Kevin, on how important it is for us and even adults as parents, those things we say out there that we can't take back. How do we learn as kids to take that pause? That's one of the things we're going to talk about is how do we as parents kind of take a pause, and I've got some strategies for that, and also help our kids learn to do that. Mindfulness kind of sounds, I always say, kind of guru for it sometimes. It's not about that as much as it's learning some really cognitive behaviors that are going to help us later on. It's about moving out to being a better adult, really is. How can I find that balance for me? And then we're also going to talk about how can you create learning spaces in your home for authentic learning, and how does that look? Because sometimes as a parent, like you said, we found the quiet corner. I don't necessarily have a dedicated office either. And so it's difficult for parents. And if you've got multiple kids, multiple parents. So she's going to talk about some ways to think about what you're doing and what that might look like in those spaces that would help with that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I hope everyone checks out those next chat and chews, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Linda Gale.
Thank you,
Amazing.